Welcome to Old English Outfitters YouTube channel. I'm Alan. So today we had a lot of fun taking a look at a Uberti 1873 Cattleman single-action revolver. Really cool little guns. You know, Colt back in 1873 made their famous peacemaker, their single-action peacemaker, called at the time the single-action army because the United States military adopted it for the use by the troops. It's this classic single-action revolver. True Colt single actions are hard to find. Vintage guns are very expensive, very collectible. Colt still makes the single action army, but it's extremely rare, extremely hard to find, and very expensive if you do find one. A company in Italy called Uberti has been making these for a long time. They're very quality replicas or reproductions of this pattern of gun. It works exactly the same way as a Colt single action does. Now, you got to remember that cartridge guns came about after the Civil War. So after the period of about 1865 was when cartridge revolvers and cartridge firearms generally started becoming more and more popular as the technology matured. Took till 1873 for Colt to come up with their famous single action. Uberti makes not just this, but they make a lot of different single action revolvers. They make the Remington pattern, they make the Smith & Wesson pattern, because other people besides just Colt were making single-action revolvers in that time frame. Different barrel lengths existed. This is a 4 5/8 inch barrel. Colt's classic single-action army that was used by the Army was a 7.5 inch barrel, and then there was a 5.5 inch barrel. It was called the so-called artillery model, and it was issued to troops too in, of all things, the artillery, right? So we had a lot of fun shooting this gun this morning. This one's in caliber .45 Colt. Now, Uberti also makes these in .357 Magnum, and they do make some special guns in .4440, which was the original and really popular gun for civilians in this pattern. This is a single-action gun. What does that mean? Single action. Single action means that the action of the trigger only does a single thing, just one thing. It releases the hammer. So when the gun's on full cock, the only thing the trigger does is drop the hammer. So you can pull the trigger when the hammer's not cocked, not going to happen. Single action, you have to manually cock it each time. And we got him over the side of the lung that time. These guns, today, you know, we're used to things that hold 15 rounds, 17 rounds, 20 rounds, so forth and so on, right? These had a 6-shot chamber, but smart people of the day never loaded them with 6 rounds because it wasn't safe. Because this gun, like lots of single actions of its time, has a fixed firing pin on the hammer. If you lower the hammer against a live round, that firing pin is sitting right against the primer. So a hard rap on that hammer, like if it fell off out of your holster while you were on horseback, could discharge the gun. So they only loaded them with 5. But how do you load them with 5 conveniently to make sure that you end up with the hammer down on the empty and therefore safe chamber? Well, they had a formula for doing that. I used that formula this morning to load this thing, and it works really well. This type of action has a half cock. You have to move the hammer to the half cock in order for the cylinder to freely turn. So to load these things, the first thing you did was go to half cock, and then you open a loading gate. Unlike magazine-fed guns where you put a 15-round or 17-round magazine in from the bottom, you have to load these one at a time. So the formula to make sure you're safe is you load the first one, and you move the cylinder to the next chamber, and you leave that one empty. You skip over it. You load the next 4. Then you close the loading gate, go to full cock, and lower the hammer, and it will go right into that empty chamber. Load 1, skip 1, load 4, lower the hammer, and you're safe. You're good to go. And it works. Very efficient way to handle this gun. Very safe way to handle this gun. Triggers on a single action gun, because it doesn't travel very far, are very, very light. Doesn't take much to move the hammer. When you're done firing, you have to unload them one at a time too. You don't just pop the empty magazine out and put a new one in, right? Or open the cylinder. You load one at a time, you got to unload one at a time, get the empty casings out. To do that, same thing, and you got to go to half cock so the cylinder will turn. You open the loading gate, and then you have an ejector rod that's up here, spring loaded. And that pushes through the chamber and knocks the empty casing out. And of course, it helps when you're doing that if you have the gun upside down. So gravity will help you pull those out of there. So one at a time, you got to kick the empty casings out and then go back and reload and start over. These used to be state of the art. This was the very best defensive pistol you could own at one time. If you've never had a chance to try a single action, try it. It gives you, first of all, they're fun, but it gives you a great appreciation for the people who actually use these things for serious purposes. Now, we've all seen Western movies where these things are used, and sometimes if you stop in between frames and you count, you discover that they're shooting a lot more rounds than they actually held, right? Well, you had 5, and then you had to reload, and it wasn't a really fast process to do that. But they were the state of the art at the time. Gives you a good appreciation for it. If you've never tried one, try it. Lots of fun. They're accurate. They're very comfortable guns to shoot. 45 Colt, we used cowboy loads, which in this frame are very comfortable. They don't kick you much at all. 45 Colt started life as a military cartridge. And in the military cartridge pressures and configuration, it's still an effective round. There's some really heavy 45 Colt loads that are made for things like the Ruger Blackhawk series and some of the other heavier frame guns that are out there. Don't use those in this. It's too hard on this frame size. Stick with the cowboy stuff. Is this a viable defense tool today? Watch some of the cowboy action shooters sometime, and you might be impressed with how well, how quickly, how efficiently they can operate something like this. So I'm not going to say it is or it isn't. If you're skilled at its use, it might be. Okay? So worth thinking about. Uberti makes a lot of these. We carry a lot of them. Average price is around $500. It depends a little bit on the configuration of the gun. You can get these like this one with a steel frame, color case hardened, beautiful pistol. Really nice blue finish. The color case hardened is nice. Just a very nice wood stocks, good figure on them. You can get them in this configuration. You can get them with a brass frame. You can get them with those barrel lengths we talked about, other 7.5 or 5.5 inch barrel, other calibers, 357 Magnum. Some of the cartridge conversion guns that Uberti makes, which are replicas of the guns that existed before the 1873 came out, when they were taking black powder frames, cap and ball frame guns, and converting them to cartridges. They still make replicas of those too. A lot of those are in 45 Colt or a lot in 38 Special, depending on the frame. So there's a lot of flexibility here. We carry a pretty good variety of these, so if you ever want to look at one or handle one, you just want to channel your inner cowboy, and when you're sitting watching a Western movie some night, come pay us a visit and see what we got here. Really, really fun guns to shoot. Definitely a piece of firearms history. This was a significant step that bridged the gap between cap and ball revolvers and cartridge firearms, which eventually, of course, led to these things we have today. So, that's all we have for right now. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, I'm Alan for Old English Outfitters. Thank you for watching.